Hi, it's Jen from Shabby Fabrics, back with the foundation paper piecing series. And this month it's for July, the New York Beauty block made with mostly a collection called Fired Up by Blank Quilting. Really spoke to me this time. Diane had said a New York Beauty block would be beautiful. And between that great idea she had and putting some really fun fabrics together, we think this is a beautiful block to display. We've got the table stand. When we first introduced this back in April with our beautiful tulip, that one was on the craft holder. So whether you want to have it on maybe on the wall by your workstation, maybe the entrance to your home, or on a table, lots of different craft holders to be offering you. Check those out on the website. You're looking for a 12-inch craft holder. We did that beautiful rose. And then we have, of course, our lovely butterfly that's flitting around the garden in spring. And now, of course, the New York Beauty for July. One of the things that I want to point out to you that is different about this month than the previous month is the curve. That's new to me too. So I've got my tutorial from Diane. I got my instructions and got to practice. And so I'm going to bringing you her tips and techniques so that you can get that nice, beautiful curve as well. By the way, on these other kits, gosh, they're flying out the door. If you want to complete this series and pick up those last kits, be sure to do that when you grab this kit. We're down to a very small amount. And of course, once some of these fabrics are gone, I'm having to start to substitute fabrics if I'm making more kits. So go ahead and get those kits. Now for the New York Beauty block, just like we've been doing, what you can expect in your kit is exactly what you're seeing, all the exact fabrics, your backing as well. You're binding in some extra fabric for the hanging sleeve on the back. In addition to that, of course, you're getting your full color pattern, and we're giving you, just like we've been doing, 2 sets of the foundation paper piecing so that you can either practice with one, and then when you're feeling very confident and ready to go, you use your Fired Up fabrics and any of the other beautiful, I put some fairy frost, this one, that's that gold metallic that's in there. And you're using the other set to make your sample. Or if you're like, I know all about foundation paper piecing, I'm a pro. Maybe you can just use your other fabric from your stash and make a completely different one to maybe give as a gift. We know you love the stickers. We have our 1 set, 2 sets. So those, of course, are included in your kit. And we know that people just love getting organized. Hey, if you're just now joining us for this series, as I said, we started back with the April beautiful tulip. That's where I showed you really how foundation paper piecing works in conjunction with our add-a-quarter rulers and how that whole thing works. It's not intuitive, not even close to intuitive, but really fun and addicting once you learn how to do that. So be sure to check out that first, even that second video. What we're going to do, I'm going to kind of take you to where we are with this, and then I'm going to talk to you about curved piecing, because this part of how all of this is going together, you can review those previous videos to get those sections assembled. And as before, as we pointed out, being able to cut your fabrics and staying organized with your stickers and then setting up your group A, your group B is very important and will ensure your success. So what I want to do here and why this month is different is talk about the curve piecing. That's where we're going to spend the bulk of our time today. As we know, when we're doing these different sections, we're sewing to the paper. That's what this paper here is all about. But for this section here, as well as these 2 sections out here, they don't actually involve sewing on paper at all. You're just using those templates really to cut out the shapes of that, but you're not going to be sewing those onto paper. Remember in the previous months when we did our foundation paper piecing, we would sew all the sections together and then remove the paper in the very, very end, just before we put our borders on. Diane recommended removing the paper of these smaller sections before they're sewn together, and that's just to reduce the bulk that's already happening in that curve piecing, a lot less going on, and made the assembly simpler. Her first pointer for me, and I'll pass on to you, was for these 2 pieces the first thing that we will be doing is placing them right side together and sewing with that true 1/4 inch seam allowance. And that's going to set us up for our very next step. So I've got a seam guide on my machine. I can feel this fabric has sizing in it. And there's a reason for that, right? We know that when we start dealing with curves and we're trying to make curves be with curves, things can get a little crazy and stretched out and almost distorted. So I can feel the sizing that has been added into this. So that is definitely something I want to point out to you. I'm just going to go sew that 1/4 inch seam allowance here and here. And then we're going to talk about how do we manage these arcs going together. Some really cool pointers coming your way. I'll meet you right over there at the sewing machine and we'll get these 2 sections sewn together. I would normally have a gray kind of on my machine. My next step a little bit later on in our journey is involving a red thread. So I've got that involved or actually loaded onto my machine. We have just a 2-piece thread set this month, red and blue. Very affordable. Be sure to pick that up. So we'll want to press open our seams. And we want to be gentle. We are dealing with bias. So we can see that will be coming right along here. That makes sense. And then here, let's trim off some more threads. Of course, along the bottom. Now, because this is words, and I should have mentioned this before, when you are laying out your templates, let me point these out. That's these sections right here. Just be mindful of the orientation. Now, they've done a good job of, the words are kind of going every direction you could think about. It's still kind of nice to kind of run your shape along that so that when they are there, they're not all just going off at a completely crazy angle. You can see that there is this horizontal, this one's vertical. So just be mindful when you're laying out your templates and getting ready to cut out those 2 shapes. All right, these are the 2 we're going to attach together first. And you can see that we've got this seam, we have this seam right there, and we have this seam. Our goal, of course, is to line those all up, and that is what's going to be making our block. And that portion up in the corner we'll talk about in the very end. But we're just going to deal with these 2 first. So we will lay this direction, but we have found it is much simpler when we sew this with the larger piece on top. That's just something we discovered. So I'm going to roll that back. I just want to make sure those seams are stacking absolutely on top of each other from top to bottom. And it looks like we're lined up really, really well. And once you have that, we're going to pin. Now, in our previous months, we introduced a glue stick, but we only really used it for that first piece to kind of anchor that because it's not sewn anywhere. It's just being glued down. This technique that Diane pointed out works very well, and we're definitely going to be using the glue stick considerably more. Your first step, because you're thinking, how is any of this going to marry up? Your first step is to lay this directly in that corner, and if you want even just a little bit of glue, just to kind of help stabilize that, holding that in position, just to start with. Go ahead and do that. We don't want any shifting when we're sewing. So I'm not only going to do a little bit of glue there, I'm going to really anchor this in with it some additional pin, kind of back and forth. So that is not going anywhere. And we'll do the same. A little bit of glue just kind of acts like another pair of hands. And we're making sure that that glue is staying inside that seam allowance, which of course is 1/4 of an inch. You don't want to go outside of that because as this glue dries, you will see that kind of dull haze of where that glue is. You have to work in small sections, stack that directly on top, press, but don't distort. You want to be gentle with the fabric. Okay, now we'll work in sections about 1.5 inches where we're just applying a little bit more glue, staying inside that seam allowance. It's very important you're not pushing or pulling this fabric. You're just kind of pressing it together. Because this is on bias, I could stretch this so this is never going to sink up. It's really important that we're just kind of pressing and we're very gentle with that fabric. So I'll continue working in small sections, pressing and gluing. Pressing with my fingers and gluing. Okay, let me just work here. I want to show you when you kind of get near here, it's okay to put glue kind of on both sections because you want this. I want you to see how it does end up somehow fitting. You're thinking there's no way this is going to fit. Is that crazy that it ends up fitting? Then as I get kind of where my pin is, Diane had put a little bit of glue in both the top and the bottom. Is that crazy that it fits? And yep, you've got some of this, but that easing has to happen because when we end up sewing this together and then turning this out, it has to be able to give for that to be able to lay nicely around the arc. So I'll do the same thing down here, gluing 1.5 inch sections, just pressing them together until this whole thing is down flat. Then we'll be going to the sewing machine. I'll be using my purple thing as I'm sewing to kind of keep this out of the way. And I'll be sewing very slowly and we'll stay together on that. And it's going to be a little bit of a longer process, at least through half of that. I want you to see how I kind of have to stop sometimes and redistribute kind of where that kind of wave is. I want you to see that, but I'll go ahead and get this side glued and then I'll meet you over at the sewing machine. So at the sewing machine here, we definitely want to reinforce that. I have something called a purple thing. It's just a safety measure to help guide that fabric, manipulate that fabric, get it out of the way, and keep my fingers away from that needle. I've got a 70 in today because I'm doing the paper piecing. So I'm just going to put in a stitch or two and then going to be doing some back stitching to secure that. Let me go a little bit further ahead and let's back stitch that. If you see see how I can kind of push that out of the way? You're almost kind of redistributing where the fabric is. That's what you want to do here. You don't want to take a tuck. That is not an option here. So if you see how I can push that, it may not, yeah, I think we could go with that so we don't take that tuck. Here, I want to make sure on the bottom side that the seams are still open and stacked on top of each other and that nothing has shifted. So this is not a fast process. That part, a little more tender, takes a little bit more time, but the results are absolutely worth it. We do want to be pressing really downward toward the larger piece. So it's good to kind of feel that. Make sure you're doing a little bit of finger pressing. I'll bring that out so you can see that better. Isn't that amazing that they fit? When you first look at it, you think there's no way that's going to fit, and it does. Okay. Might take just a little bit of pressing to get it good and flat. So take your time with that. So this portion is ready now. So we mentioned that we have our seam here. Really, it kind of, this point, this all aligns. So once again, we would want to make sure that we are well aligning that point, that whole distance. Once you have found that, you'll pin that. And I think in this instance, as I look at this, I think it's going to be better to actually pin it from this side, just because I'll be able to see this whole section. If I was here, I'm not going to necessarily see everything that's beneath me. I like being able to see this whole side. So we will reassess that, get lined up again. Okay, pin. Notice I'm pinning on this side and not here. That's because I can keep it in place. If I'm pinning out here and I don't sew over pins, if I'm pinning out here, I have to remove it before I get to that very important location. So that is something that I have learned is really helpful. And even if I want to pin another pin there, just so there's no lateral movement. Just like before, the first thing we're going to be doing, I'm going to be putting a little bit of, I might even put a little bit of glue on that seam and this seam. Actually, not that one, for sure not that one, just this one. Because we need to be able to flip that over. So only this seam. Stacking that exactly where it belongs. Now, we've got a lot more distance where we could be putting in pins and kind of weaving that pin back and forth so that that is not going anywhere. And once again, we're working in small sections, adding a little bit of glue inside that seam allowance, and we're just going to press together. All right, so I'll keep working here as I get toward my pin and get closer. Again, pinning down at this end, little bit of glue, pin, glue all the way. Once that's done, we will once again go to the sewing machine and we will once again be very carefully sewing that 1/4 seam allowance. Everything is nice and flat, somehow miraculously. And we will once again be using our purple thing to keep our fingers safe, fabric smooth, and redistribute any level of waves or kind of rolls we're seeing here, so things are not, we're not taking any tucks. As far as when to stop, if you see a bubble's kind of coming, a bunching is coming, just stop and relieve the pressure good and early. You don't want to wait till you're on top of that, and then it kind of has no place to go. Okay, let's check it out. I'll warm up that seam. Warm seams are more pliable, we know that. And once again, we're pushing down. Look how pretty that is. See, so even if, guys, I don't have a lot of experience foundation paper piecing. I don't. You can see though that from the earlier videos that we filmed on just the process of foundation paper piecing for how this all works, even with curves, these are methods that work. You don't need to be an accomplished quilter to do foundation paper piecing. That is so pretty. Now you say, well, what about the top of my block? Here's what Diane had told me. These kind of gentler curves are very feasible, but because this was a tighter turn, it was creating puckering and it was becoming difficult. So what we decided on doing, and I thought this was a very clever technique, and your pattern pieces will include right here for fabric A, we put that on there to be able to cut our fabric out. But then over here, there's a freezer paper template. We love to use the Cut-Right heavy duty freezer paper anytime I'm doing applique. I need to make a template that I want to use again and again. I've done that with all of the woolly mug mats, the woolly mug rugs, where you just know you want to make that template once. It's very nice and thick paper. We just put that over our light box with a piece of our freezer paper, and we simply made our template. Once you have that, there's a really cool technique. You've actually got two options. Some people like to put the shiny side down on, in fact, I'll just demonstrate that for you, on the back of the fabric and iron it down. What that does is it creates a nice ridge for turning around. But some people say, well, how are you going to iron, or how are you going to attach this? And you can certainly use a glue stick. You could use sizing. I'm going to show you a different technique that's really cool, and we'll skip the need for what I just said. I'm going to grab my beautiful Sewline glue stick. This is the shiny side. This is the flat side. I'm going to put just a little bit on there and sit that right in that corner. Just like that. What that's going to do for me is now, let me move this over so you can see this. Now, when I iron that edge over, the fabric is sticking to the freezer paper. Isn't that just so clever? I'm getting a nice, good ridge here. Tuck that in. It's a really cool technique. So this is what will be going in our corner. So of course, once that's down, we need to, that's why you don't want to put a whole lot of glue. You're just going to pull this back. That's it. And if you're going to be making that, using the other side of foundation paper piecing, you can just use that again. I like to go repress that. So that is absolutely down. Once you've done that, we know that this is going to sit in that corner. So we're going to add just a little bit of glue. And what we're doing, you want to be over that, just about that 1/4 of an inch here. In fact, I'm just going to line up with my table, right? I'm going to line this up. So I am absolutely, maybe even over here. I'm right in that corner. And that nice turned under edge is right there, just like that. Just like that. And we should be overlapping about 1/4 of an inch. And you can check that. Just like that. So I'm going to put a little bit more glue. Put glue on this side. This was what we discovered was the simplest way to work through this very tight curve there. And then once that's down, you're happy with its location. Make sure I'm happy with that. I might even glue that, I might even iron that down. Kind of just put that in place. If you're happy with it, and I want to move it just a little bit more, that's why I had the red thread loaded in my machine. I'm going to go stitch that close to the edge. Isn't that cool? So fun. Really, really fun. Borders, just like we've been doing. Of course, we have our beautiful borders going on. Could not resist those fireworks. So we'll be attaching our borders, pressing to the outside, and then of course our top and our bottom border is going on. And then for finishing with the sleeve on the back and the binding, be sure to check out those earlier videos where I go over that in detail. As far as our top quilting goes, again with our red and our blue, we'll get some close-ups here. You can see that what we love to do, and I've touched on this before, rather than stitching in the ditch and sometimes you're on the red and sometimes you're on the white, I love how we just make that commitment with our red thread that we're going to stitch on the red. So there's no chance of that red thread traveling onto the white background and it looks terrible. And again, on the blue, right here around our border, we make that commitment to sew on the blue instead of trying to split that gap of stitching in the ditch. And sometimes you're kind of bleeding onto that white background. So I hope if you haven't jumped into the fun, do it. Just do it. It's so much fun to learn how to do foundation paper piecing. As I said, you do not need to be an accomplished quilter. There is so much more coming your way. If you haven't already subscribed and hit that bell so that you're automatically alerted whenever we have new videos, be sure to do that right now. And I will see you next month as we continue our foundation paper pasting series, this time for August.